So we, as a country, have grappled this tragic week with the shooting, which took place at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, where 11 lives were lost. Joining us for our next segment is Rabbi Brad Hirschfield. He's president of the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership. Welcome, Brad. You there?
I am here. It's good to be with you both.
Thank you so much, Brad, for coming on today. How can we come together after such a horrific hate crime?
So, the work of coming together always starts by first looking inward at what we can do. See, there are three categories we really want to come together, and I think the questions you posed before the Deputy Press Secretary were fantastic. Unfortunately, the answers were far less fantastic. And that has nothing to do with my views about the president. It has to do with the impulse to always blame someone else. There are three categories, I said. The first is justice. There is a murderer, and he must and will receive justice. But then there is blame, and that is different from responsibility. Blame always looks outward and is typically about fighting over the past. Healing is fundamentally about assuming responsibility. And while not all are guilty, there is a role for each of us to assume responsibility from wherever we stand and whatever views we have if we really want to heal. Healing never begins with someone else. It always begins with each of us. And that doesn't mean everyone's equally guilty. It just means we all have equal responsibility for creating a better future.
Wow. That's very good, Brad. That's very good. And what would you say, how can we prevent ourselves from, I know we all can tend to join together doing something very horrible in our country. But what can we do on a day-to-day basis to practice some things that could help us not just come together when we have a crime or a storm or flood or something? How can we daily love one another and move in that particular environment?
It's a great question, Devalier. It might surprise you. My first answer is I'm less concerned about how and when we come together. I'm much more concerned about when we don't come together. How do we treat each other? And how do we talk to each other? See, once we've come together, it's easy to be good to each other. And in moments of crisis, because most people, regardless of views or policies or politics, are fundamentally decent. I believe that. In fact, I couldn't really be a rabbi if I didn't. I would say that's true for all people of faith. That deep down, whatever someone thinks about their particular theology or approach, most people, if not all people of faith I know, fundamentally believe in the goodness of other human beings. So when we come together, we'll be great to each other. And nothing unites us like a tragedy. But if the price of our unity is tragedy, that's a mighty steep price. I think what we really have to do is ask, when we're not together, how do we talk about each other? What words do we use to describe those we consider our opponents? What partial truths do we think we can learn best, even from those we disagree with most? If we can work on those things, we won't have to wait for tragedy to come together. And more importantly, even when we're not together, we actually will know how to be decent to one another.
Well, and Rabbi, it's interesting because I think that's very wise. I actually think what you're saying is actually somewhat similar to what the White House press secretary was saying in the sense at the end where he said, we need to have an honest debate about ideas and not calling each other names and accusing someone of being a horrible, racist, misogynistic, xenophobic, horrific person when they just want to talk about immigration. Do you think that that's part of what's missing?
I absolutely do. I think when you jump to assume the worst about the contents of someone else's heart, it rarely leads to a decent conversation. That said, I am concerned that the same person who the press secretary is defending about not name-calling rose to power in part on his rather artful use of name-calling, whether it was low-energy Jeb or crooked Hillary or any of the others. So I think he's 100% right. And I would simply challenge him to now take that back to his boss and begin to practice it. By the way, it's not a political issue, because I would say the exact same thing to those who said there's a direct line of connection between the Oval Office and the murders in Pittsburgh. That's simply not true. It's simply not true. But it is true that every hateful act in history has been set up with hateful words. And that is something that the more power you have, the more careful you have to be about.
And I was just reflecting on, Carrie, growing up in Mississippi, my grandmother used to always, and I can't even think what scripture it is, but she said, out of the mouth, the heart speaks, right? And so can't we say that the actions of our leaders from all different sides of hate, of racist comments, if it comes out of the mouth, is that really their heart? Is that what they're feeling in their hearts? And so I think we can talk about ideas, we can come to and have these conversations, but I really believe that the action of a thing is really what matters. What do we do outside of us talking about it?
Right. So what actions, Rabbi?
Well, the first thing is to follow the two pieces of advice you've given us, which is dare to talk with someone you don't agree with and resist the temptation to assume the worst about them. The truth of the matter is, what's amazing about this conversation and why actually I think you two are giving a gift to me personally and to your audience is, we are doing what so few people do, which is break out of an echo chamber in which the only reason we talk is to be affirmed in what we already believe. I appreciate the emotional need for that, especially in times of crisis. I also know that nothing ever got better by simply insisting that what we already know is sufficient. There's a quote from Albert Einstein that I love, and I think it's so true at these moments. No problem was ever solved at the level of consciousness which created it, which means everyone, regardless of you, is going to have to figure out how they can grow. And a very pragmatic way to begin that growth is actually sit down and have that conversation about immigration, about guns, about the upcoming elections, and resist the temptation to assume that the person you're talking to, however wrong you think they are, is evil. Just strip out the language of evil and have an authentic debate about ideas. They will affect our lives. Real emotions will come into play. But as soon as it degenerates into name-calling of any kind, regardless of the cause, and we've seen both sides do it, nothing good is going to happen. So the truth is, calling for togetherness and unity in general, everyone does, but everyone also violates it when the
Right.
issues
When it actually matters, and it
right.
means
So
who should be unifying.
Build relationships with one another in real time in advance of those moments. That's it. It's hard work, but it's also really rewarding work.
Great. Well, Rabbi, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Got to end with Einstein. Can't top that. And Rabbi, we'd love to have you back anytime.
Yes.
I would be honored to talk to you anytime and hopefully under much happier circumstances.
Yes, absolutely.